Subscribe to keep it terrifying for creepy tales, horror, and nightmares you won't forget. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and keep it terrifying.
Part 1, The Murmur Beneath the Ground. The villagers of Wirm Hollow had lived in the shadow of Mount Severin for generations. To them, the volcano was just a sleeping beast, its blackened slopes a reminder of a time long before anyone alive could remember. A few old stones marked the place where lava once kissed the earth, but the flame had been gone for centuries. That was before Russ. It started with whispers, not from people, but from the mountain. Deep groans would roll through the earth like the stomach of a god. People joked about it at first. Guess Severin wants a snack, they'd laugh. But laughter turned to confusion, and confusion to fear when the groans became words. Late at night, those who lived closest to the mountain began to hear it, a voice, low and gravelly, rising from beneath the soil like hot breath. You are weak. You are worms. All of you. At first, they thought it was some cruel prank. But then came the dreams. Everyone began dreaming of fire. Of being buried in ash. Of something massive watching them through molten eyes. And always, a name spoken like a curse, Russ. Children started waking up screaming. Livestock died without wounds. Crops rotted in the ground despite the sun. It wasn't long before people began to see him. Not clearly. Just flickers. A shadow walking through the fog along the mountain base. A silhouette standing still at the edge of the village, too tall to be human, shoulders jagged like crags of cooled lava. Always watching. Russ never spoke to them face to face. He didn't need to. He whispered through the cracks in their homes, through the wind, through the trembling stones beneath their feet. And what he said was always the same, you're nothing. You've had peace too long. Time to burn. He played tricks. He would make wells run dry in one house, flood another with boiling water. Tools vanished. People slipped on nothing and broke their bones. Chickens exploded into flames. No one could predict it, no one could fight it. Every cruelty was punctuated by the echo of his laughter, a deep, seismic chuckle that rolled down the slopes like a thunderclap. A few tried to leave. Their cars stalled before reaching the edge of the village. Tires melted. Roads cracked open, swallowing vehicles whole. One family tried to hike out. They were found 3 days later, their bodies fused together in a sculpture of blackened glass, melted mid-scream. Everyone understood the message. Russ didn't want them gone. He wanted them afraid. Part 2, The Bully of the Hollow. Russ wasn't born like other monsters. He forged from anger, buried hate, and the heat of long-forgotten cruelty. Legend said the mountain had once been peaceful. A place of spiritual warmth. But over centuries, things had been buried in its roots, not just bones, but memories. Pain. Secrets no one wanted to face. And in that silence, something awoke. Russ. He wasn't just a volcano anymore. He was the volcano. Every stone, every plume of smoke, every ash flake drifting into the wind, it was him. And Russ hated everything that lived beneath his gaze, especially people. He hated the way they smiled. The way they built their fragile homes like their lives mattered. He hated their crops, their songs, their prayers to gods that no longer listened. Russ whispered things to them in the dark. He mocked the dying. He mimicked the voices of lost loved ones. Children began hearing their parents calling to them from the woods, only to vanish when they stepped outside. Teenagers would stare into the mountain at night, hypnotized, mumbling to themselves as if responding to an unseen bully. You're worthless. Everyone laughs at you, you think you matter. You're ash waiting to happen. Russ got inside their heads. And it wasn't just fear anymore. It was shame. People began to turn on each other, neighbors accusing neighbors of attracting Russ's rage. Families blaming children. Friends avoiding one another, afraid that simply being near someone might draw his attention. He was isolating them. And that's when the carving started. All across the village, on walls, in fields, even inside homes, they began to appear. Deep gouges into wood and stone, burned in with an unnatural heat. The same word, over and over again, Russ. Sometimes, it was carved with something else. Faces. Twisted, melting faces. Screaming. Laughing. There was malice in the detail, the kind of hate that only a bully truly understands, the joy of seeing others squirm. Elder Marna, who had lived in Wirm Hollow for 89 years, said it best, Russ is fire with a soul. And that soul is sick. No one knew what Russ wanted. He didn't make demands. He didn't ask for sacrifices. He didn't need to. His joy came from breaking people, not quickly, but slowly. He watched them like a child watches ants under a magnifying glass, gleeful in their panic. When someone finally snapped, Russ rewarded them. One night, a man named Caleb, after weeks of torment, climbed the mountain with a bottle of gasoline. He screamed into the crater, daring Russ to show himself. Daring the earth to swallow him. They say Russ laughed louder than ever before that night. Caleb's body was found the next morning at the center of the village, not burned, but turned to obsidian. His mouth was frozen mid-scream. On his chest, etched in volcanic glass, was a single word, good. Russ didn't just want destruction. Russ wanted to win. Part 3, Games of Fire. Russ was patient. He didn't erupt. Not in the traditional sense. There were no skies blackened with ash or rivers of lava, not yet. That would be too easy. Too quick. Russ liked it slow. Like heat in a kettle. A long boil. The village tried to fight back in small ways. They built watchtowers, thinking maybe they could see him coming. They lit lanterns at night, thinking maybe the light would keep the shadows out. They even formed a peace circle, a desperate council of old women and terrified men who tried to remember the old mountain songs, lullabies that once calmed Severin. But Russ didn't want peace. He wanted screams. One by one, the watchtowers collapsed. Not from storm or tremor, but internal rot. Wooden beams turned to mush overnight. Nails liquefied. The final tower burst into flames during a rainstorm. Lanterns flickered and died, no matter how much oil they poured. And the songs? When sung, they only made things worse. The ground would groan. Houses would shake. And those who sang would wake the next morning with black soot around their mouths and ash crusted in their lungs. Russ didn't like lullabies. He preferred screams. Then came the games. At first, they seemed like nightmares. People waking to find their homes rearranged. Furniture melted. Walls warped. One morning, every door in the village was sealed shut, not locked, but fused shut with hardened stone. They had to break their way out. Next came the animals. Pets vanished. Birds flew into windows. Horses ran straight into the woods and were never seen again. Then came the mirrors. Each home had at least one. And one morning, they all changed. No one saw their reflection anymore. Instead, they saw Russ. Not fully, just parts of him, a glowing eye, cracked lips of burning coal, a grin made of shifting magma. He would whisper through the glass, "You're so ugly when you're afraid. Go ahead, cry. I like that. Soon you'll beg me to end it." People covered their mirrors. Broke them. Burned them. But even shattered glass would sing his voice back to them. And every time someone snapped, Russ laughed. His laughter was a sound that made dogs howl, bones ache, and windows crack. It was deep, not loud, but felt through the chest like a pulse. You could hear it even when he wasn't laughing. By then, no one doubted what Russ was. He wasn't a creature. He wasn't a ghost. He was a bully made of stone and fire. A spirit born of torment. The volcano itself was just his body, and the mountain trembled whenever he was pleased. That's when the school caught fire. No one had lit it. There were no lightning strikes. It simply went up in a wave of heat, flames curling inward, like they were hungry for something inside. When they searched the ruins, they found the walls covered in handwriting. It was from the children. Each message was a confession, things they had never said aloud. Fears. Secrets. Guilts. Names of those they envied or hated. Like Russ had pulled the poison right out of them and scrawled it in soot across the scorched wood. At the center of the classroom floor, carved deep into blackened boards, was the biggest message of all: this is what you get. Russ. Part 4, The Ones Who Fought Back. There were still a few who didn't give in. They were called the Steeled, not because they were brave, but because they were numb. When you've seen your neighbor swallowed by molten earth, when your sister's reflection starts mocking you from a puddle, when your bed weeps hot tar, something inside breaks. The Steeled didn't scream anymore. They stopped talking, stopped hoping. But they didn't kneel. Russ noticed. He hated them for it. He whispered louder in their homes, clawed deeper into their dreams. He made their bones itch with heat. But still they resisted. So Russ got creative. He started turning them against one another. One morning, a woman named Irene woke up to find her husband missing. In his place lay a pile of rocks arranged like a human, his hat resting gently on top, his wedding ring around a coal-black finger. Russ left a message scorched into the floorboards, stone for stone. "You're next." The Steeled said nothing. But now, they watched each other. And Russ laughed again. One night, a group of them climbed Mount Severin. They weren't looking to escape, they wanted to confront Russ. Or whatever lay at the heart of him. They climbed in silence, carrying tools, iron stakes, silver symbols, prayer cloths soaked in wine. Only one came back. Her name was Petra. She returned barefoot, skin cracked and blackened, with eyes like cooled glass. She didn't speak for days. When she finally did, all she said was, "He's not in the mountain. The mountain is inside him." They kept her in the chapel after that, wrapped in wet cloth to stop her skin from flaking away. But every night, she'd smile a little wider, like Russ had planted something inside her. She wasn't alone. People began muttering to themselves in the same voice Russ used, low, gravelly, cruel. A teacher stabbed herself in front of her class and carved Russ's name into her own face. A boy was found sitting in the cemetery, whispering jokes in a voice not his own. "Wanna hear one?" he asked the mayor. The mayor said yes, trembling. And the boy replied, "Your whole life." Then he walked into the woods and never came back. The village was breaking. Not just from outside pressure, but from the inside out. And that's when the earth started to bleed. It began near the well. A thick, red-black ooze bubbled up through the stones. It wasn't water. It wasn't lava. It was something else, hot, slow-moving, and hungry. The smell was unbearable. Like cooked flesh and old memories. Someone dipped a spoon in it once, out of madness or curiosity. They didn't even get to taste it. The moment it touched their tongue, they turned to ash, not burned, just gone. Like Russ had claimed them. People stopped touching anything. Russ left more messages. Not carved this time, but spoken aloud by the trees, the wind, even the dead. "This is my town now. You want peace? Prove you're worth it. Beg." But no one begged. Not yet. They still had one thing Russ couldn't melt or mock: hope. Even if it was hanging by a thread. Part 5, The Burned Pact. Hope is a stubborn thing. Even when Russ turned the river sour, even when people started waking up with scorched footprints around their beds, even when the air itself began to hum with his mocking voice, they still didn't give him what he wanted. They wouldn't beg. And that enraged him. Russ became erratic. Less calculated. Storms of cinders swept through the village without warning. Whole trees twisted into screaming shapes overnight. One morning, the sun rose black, casting no light, only a dull, sickly glow like a festering wound in the sky. Still, the villagers didn't kneel, because they were planning something. In secret, in cellars, in the backs of hollowed barns, beneath floorboards, they met. Not the steeled this time, but others, quiet ones, broken ones, the ones who had nothing left to lose. They called themselves the cold-blooded. It was Petra who gave them the idea, in one of her rare, lucid hours. You can't kill Russ, but you can bind him. He's a fire. So give him something to burn. That became their creed. Burn something back. The cold-blooded found an ancient ritual buried in a forgotten ledger, a rite once used by mountain tribes to trap restless spirits in stone. It required blood, fire, and most importantly, a willing vessel. Someone had to invite Russ in, not to fight him, but to contain him. At first, no one volunteered. Then, a girl named Laura stepped forward. She was only 17. Her brother had vanished in the mirror screams. Her father had hung himself after seeing Russ's name carved into the bark of every tree he planted. She said she had nothing left to lose. The ritual had to be performed on Severin's rim, the heart of Russ's body. The cold-blooded made the journey in secret, cloaked in ash and silence. They carried Laura, dressed in fire-resistant cloth and smeared in mountain oil. When they reached the crater, they found Russ waiting. Not as a shadow this time. Not a whisper. He was there. He rose from the mouth of the mountain like a column of living magma, wearing the shape of a man, a giant of coal and smoke, his face a cruel mask of half-melted stone, his teeth glowing hot as he grinned. And he spoke. You think you can bind me? I'm the voice in your screams. The bully in your bones. Laura stepped forward anyway. She knelt. Not in surrender, but in invitation. The ritual began. Words were chanted, old and broken. Symbols etched in blood lit up around the crater like stars reflected in hell. Russ laughed. He roared. He lunged. And the moment he touched Laura, the world exploded in fire. The mountain screamed. The sky split open with lightning that struck upward. The cold-blooded were thrown backward. Many died instantly. The rest were blinded. The ground cracked, and the trees burst into blue flame. But Laura stood still. Her eyes were closed. Her skin blistered, but she did not burn. Russ was inside her. And he was trapped. For a moment, the mountain went still. The smoke thinned. Birds returned. The sun rose in its true color for the first time in weeks. Russ was silent. It worked. Or so they thought. Part 6, The Fire Within. The village held its breath. Laura stood at the edge of the crater, her body glowing faintly with heat, eyes closed as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. The mountain was quiet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air wasn't thick with smoke and threat. But Russ was not defeated. Russ was trapped. Inside her. The fire, the fury, the hatred, all burning within Laura's chest like a coiled serpent. She opened her eyes, and the village saw something no one was prepared for, the flicker of molten light in her pupils, like twin suns burning through glass. At first, it seemed she was the village's savior. The cold-blooded thought their sacrifice had worked. The curse was lifted. But whispers began to spread. Strange things followed Laura wherever she went. Flowers withered at her touch. Children cried out at night, haunted by dreams of a laughing volcano. People heard Russ's voice coming from her, not the mountain, calling them worthless, broken, begging to be crushed. The village realized the terrible truth. Russ wasn't gone. He was inside Laura, a bully given a new body. She started to change. Her skin grew warmer, crackling faintly like burning coal beneath the surface. Her voice sometimes cracked into a harsh, gravelly rasp. Her smile was sharp, like a volcanic vent ready to spew. Some whispered she was becoming Russ. Others said she already was Russ. And the worst part? Laura liked it. She began to turn on the village, not with open fire, but with words. The same cruel, relentless taunts that Russ once used echoed from her lips. You're all weak. You don't deserve peace. I'm the fire that burns inside you. Those who opposed her found themselves cursed with nightmares, illness, accidents, all whispered threats from the volcano's new mouthpiece. The cold-blooded, broken and scattered, realized the terrible bargain they'd made. Russ was no longer just a mountain. Russ was a presence. A dark fire that could live anywhere. And as the village watched the mountain one cold, silent night, they saw a thin plume of smoke rise, not from the crater, but from Laura's window. The bully had found a new home. Part 7, The Shadow Spreads. Laura was no longer just a girl. She had become a walking ember of Russ's rage, a flickering shadow stretching across the village and into every whispered secret. Her presence was suffocating, a slow-burning fire under the skin of Wyrm Hollow. People stopped looking at her with sympathy. Instead, they saw the volcano's cruelty reflected in her eyes, the same cold, mocking gleam that Russ always had. But Russ didn't stay confined to Laura alone. He seeped further. Walls whispered his name in the dead of night. Doors slammed with the force of unseen fists. Shadows danced just beyond the corner of vision, shapes that could never be quite caught or explained. At night, the village square became a theater of terror. Figures appeared, walking the streets with faces twisted like cooled lava, the lost souls Russ had claimed, trapped between worlds. They moved silently, staring with eyes that burned like coals, mouths forever frozen in sneers. Some nights, these shadows would gather around Laura, whispering in voices only she could hear. She would smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and reply. People started calling it the Russ's Court. It was a place where hope went to die. And for those who dared to defy it, the punishments were swift and brutal. One man who spoke openly against Laura found his crops withered overnight, blackened and cracked, as if scorched by invisible flames. A mother who tried to flee the village was found days later, wandering the forest, her skin burned and blistered, whispering Russ's taunts like a broken lullaby. The mountain itself seemed alive, cracking and shifting like a beast stretching after a long sleep. Every tremor was a reminder that Russ was still there, still watching, still waiting. And Laura? She began to change in darker ways. Her voice deepened, becoming less human. Her eyes glowed brighter. And the fire inside her grew, a terrible heat that could not be doused. Part 8, Ashes of Wyrm Hollow. Wyrm Hollow was no longer a village. It was a graveyard of whispers and ash. Laura, the living flame of Russ's fury, ruled with a voice colder than the deepest night. The people who remained didn't speak her name aloud. They didn't dare. Instead, they called her the Ember Queen, a haunting reminder of the price they paid for defying the volcano. The mountain itself was silent now, as if it had passed its torment onto her. No longer did it rumble or groan. It watched, patient and waiting. And in the hollowed remains of the village square, the shadows danced. One night, a traveler came to Wyrm Hollow. He found the village empty, streets cracked and cold. Only the bitter smell of smoke and a faint glow from Laura's window greeted him. He heard the laughter first, soft, distant, but full of menace. And then the voice, "Welcome to my domain. You're weak. You're nothing. And soon, you'll burn." The traveler never left. And Russ? Russ was no longer just a volcano, no longer just a bully. Russ had become a legacy of fear. A fire that never dies. And in Wyrm Hollow, the embers never fade.